Hello, time to light the candle and draw a line under what has been today, and what is to come in the next short while. And a brief prayer. This is a prayer about resting in God from Psalm 131, verse 2. I have calmed and quietened my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like the weaned child that is with me. And from Psalm 22, verse 9. You had my mother give birth to me. You made me trust you while I was just a baby. I have leaned on you since the day that I was born, and you have been my God since my mother gave birth to me. And a prayer. Dear God, I am in awe of your presence everywhere. I will dance before your goodness and sing a song of gladness for your grace. Amen. Now, what shall we wonder about today? Well, I'm going to ask you to wonder about your story, your unique personal story. That is the story of a journey with God. I think it can be hard sometimes to assume that our personal story is one that is significant and is one that contains God. Ignatius thinks this is important because his proposition is that when we turn in, when we move away the external layers, the things that perhaps we hide from other people, the things that are not known to community, when we move away those superficial layers, come down, that when we move to the essence of who we are, there, God is waiting for us. And in terms of our story, God is probably the important thread that is in your life, has been walking ahead of you, guiding, encouraging, supporting, even at those times when we feel most bereft and most alone. God is accompanying us. So I'm going to get you to think about your story, your mystery. But first of all, I'll tell you that I've been working with you from a book of Margaret Silf called Taste and See. And it talks about prayer, the myriad ways that we can go about praying, and how there might be aspects to prayer that we too easily dismiss as insignificant, but Silf encourages us to look for images or to try to become aware of images that emerge in our daily experience that may well be of God and of God encouraging us. And so she talks in the chapter prior to the one I'm going to talk about today of a building that she knows in a village that she frequents. And this building is on the ground floor, a shop. In the window are the items that are for sale, the hours of opening, and some other interactive material. That's at the ground level. And she asks us and you to think about the fact that there are parts of life that are interactive with the broader community, open for all to see. during opening hours, as in the case of the shop. Then above the shop is a place where people live, a family. And in that place, not accessible to those who would work or interact on the ground floor, there will be family, there will be closer friends, there will be interaction of a different kind that's in the space that is known to friends, acquaintances, and it's a non-public sphere. Then she suggests there can be a third level, something like the attic room. Now, in the attic room might not be visited all that often. It might be more like a storage space. Things that are used infrequently are put there. But they may well be things that are important, intensely private. And if we're thinking about this in terms of a relationship with a higher being, with God, then in this place, there is very limited access. And so she suggests that we might think of our life, our mystery, as being something that's lived out on 3 levels. And then, of course, Ignatius is wanting us to think about observing what goes on in our life. What happens at one of these 3 levels? What's going on in the public? What's going on in the private? And perhaps at the third, more intimate level, what happens there? What is the interaction? Can we see the times that we go to that place? What are the feelings that are associated with it? So I think that could be just one of many ways that we might think about our life as having different spheres. And depending on your particular interests, your hobbies, perhaps your work, career, then you may have another way of imagining in a visual or tactile way the different ways in which you interact. Now, this idea of your life, the sacred mystery. And Margaret Silk gives examples of 2 ways of looking at a situation. She uses one about the Berlin Wall, how someone saw the Berlin Wall, facts, figures, and so on. That was one person's interaction. And then a second idea of someone who felt that there was to be change, that took a risk, and it's a far more personal story about the falling of the Berlin Wall. And I suppose what she is telling us in using that example is we can have the very same information, but it can be construed in different ways. And so its meaning becomes quite different. And when it comes to our interaction with God, we might look at events, times gone past. Somebody might look at it one way, and yet we, even ourselves, as we look back in retrospect, experience, it can seem quite different. So she suggests that your story is in fact something that you should work with, probably not into the realm of shoulds and oughts when it comes to the spiritual, but it may be a very rich source of understanding and engagement if you can look back over your journey with God, over your personal story. Just a bit like we're doing with our installation at church at the moment, the threads of your life. What are the threads? And as I've blessed the things that people have brought along, the items, my hope is that people will see that in these threads of light and darkness, God has been present, and God uses these threads for our own transformation. And I wonder if you think about your experience in life. What has it been like? What have been the highs and the lows? You might like to go back to childhood. Think of your school years, your young adult years. As you moved to maturity and relationship years, what was happening then? And how, when you look back, would you indicate specific highs and lows? It's interesting, I think, that sometimes when we're in the thick of life, it can seem so difficult to take the next step that we can be quite unaware of God's presence. But as we develop hindsight and we look back, in retrospect, we can see that things have emerged in a way that has been growth promoting for us. There was a time when I didn't have a family. I didn't have a child. Many years of infertility treatment. And I remember when I'd come through all of that, it took many years, and I was blessed with a child. I can remember looking back thinking, I would not have changed a minute of that journey, because when I came to the end of it, I was able to say that journey made me who I am. And so this looking back on life, the mystery that is your life, will take time, but it might be very fruitful in terms of looking at where God has been with you. And there's something else that Margaret Silf says. Apart from the highs and the lows, the regrets and the joys, can you just sit back and open it out before God and say, well, here I am. Here I am in terms of this is what I would cry about. Here I am in terms of this is what I am overjoyed by. And just sit with it and see what God would have you understand. She says, when your personal story becomes connected in such a way that you can see patterns in your heart with the story of redemption of God, you are coming close to the heart and meaning of your life, and discover that the meaning is part of the meaning of the whole of God's creation and his redeeming life. Like the two that talked about their experience of the Berlin Wall. Our story is part of God's story of creation and redemption. God holds your story in the palm of his hands. I think it's a beautiful way to look and think about our life. It's sitting in the palm of God's hands. So I'm going to invite you, before I'm back next week, to have a bit of a think about your story, to get in touch with your story and to wonder about the highs and the lows, where you've been, where you think you might be going next. That's something that's particularly important to me at the moment. And come back to moments of memory. I suggest that you will need somewhere to write these things down. Draw yourself, some of you might like mind maps. Draw something down. And I'm also going to suggest that within whatever it is that you put down, that you find there is a wholeness. And the wholeness is what God is inviting you toward. You are absolutely unique. And in this unique journey, God is with you. God walks beside us. I find that an absolutely amazing idea, something I need to work constantly getting my head around. What does it mean? So it's important that our story is welcomed. Is all of your story something that you can acknowledge? Are there parts that shock, disturb, upset, but that you can lay before God? And apart from that, once it is told, can you feel welcomed by God into His wholeness? I think that is a really interesting issue, that sometimes things that happen in our lives are not what we can easily recognize and acknowledge and articulate. So think about the stumbling blocks. Think about the parts that it's not so easy to talk about, but think about how you can open those out before God and let Him hold them in His hands. I did quite a bit of work with this particular theme over yesterday and today, and I was a bit overwhelmed in some places by what I was thinking and what God was showing me. Remember that Ignatius says to us as we begin to pray, be aware of what it is that you want God to show you. We should be asking that up front. It's all right to ask. I think someone who grew up in an era where children were seen and not heard, that can be quite a hard thing to do. So relationships with parents in our own personal life can have an influence on the way that we think about God. But it can be very important to say, this is my story. These are the parts that I want to hide, even from myself, but these are the things that I can put out and share. How do you feel about that? And for me, the next question is, what is the next step I should take? Where are you leading me, God? A big question for each one of us. So I hope that those thoughts about your personal mystery have been challenging, and I hope that they're fruitful. So let me close with a prayer. Loving God, Father of us all, we give thanks for this opportunity to think about the personal, our own lives, the deep mystery, the joy of knowing you, and the fact that you are with us as we are brave enough to take the next step toward you. Amen. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.